Hi, this is Jean-Pierre Ruth for Information Week. And in this Breaking Bread session, we're going to be taking a look at, do you understand your data? Oftentimes, organizations will either be gathering, have access to a plethora of data that might come through their just, course of business and the operations that they execute, but then potentially finding ways to make use of that, leverage that, elevate that to something that could be actionable. That could take some hand holding, some dancing around to trying to navigate. Could be an internal policy, could be external concerns, and it could just be just the issues of the functionality of getting to that data. So for today's conversation, we have Craig Martell, Chief AI Officer for Cohesity, and Matt McVaney, Chief Revenue Officer for BombBomb. Matt, Craig, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us, Jeff.
Okay, great. All right, so let's talk a bit about what we're looking at, making data actionable. What does it take? What is really kind of required? And Matt, maybe you can speak from your experience of what your needs are to say, like, hey, data's great, but I need to be able to do something with it. What are you looking for to try and kind of get things started?
Totally. I think that's a great question, right? So look, I think data is irrelevant, right? Unless you know how to use it and action off of it, right? So what I'm looking for is not who the customer is, but what are they doing and why are they doing it, right? So for example, does our CRM talk to our product so I know the last time that a customer logged in? And if they don't log in within 3 days, that's a sign of, uh-oh, right? They're not adopting it. And then how do I action that to some sort of automation or sales action or something like that, right? So that's what we need, right? Is how do we connect the disparate systems in the right way to get the data to the right place and then ultimately action off of it, right?
Gotcha. Great. Let's talk a bit about the policies and concerns and things that stakeholders within organizations are looking at. Craig can speak into this. What are some of the typical things that might be within the organization? Like, okay, we have data, great. Before we go running off to the races with it, here's the laundry list of what we need to think about internally, and then what also might there be in terms of external, their data privacy, various regulations that might be coming up and say, before you do that, here's a statute that exists to say you cannot, or you have to do it this particular way.
Right. So before I answer that one, let me touch on the immediately prior question, which I think flows into the second question. Mm-hmm. The way we think about data and making data actionable and useful is to not, I think you alluded to this earlier, not think about it as an asset. Why? Because an asset's something that you hoard and lock up, but think about it as a product. And, Matt, you kind of alluded to this as well. When you think about it as a product, you're trying to understand what the end user's goals are. And internally, a product internal to your business, into your organization, you're trying to understand the end user's goals and what value they're going to get out of that. And so if you essentially have data product managers for each of the key data sets or collections of data sets, then you have the right mentality and labor in place to be able to do the work that needs to be done. And the work that needs to be done is boring workaday work, right? There's not a magical solution about suddenly data is usable. It's, I have this data coming in, which as Matt pointed out is useless unless I've transformed it in such a way that my customer can use it. So in Matt's example, if the CRM is talking, I forget what you're talking, say the HR system, I forget what you said, Matt, but, they're not actually consuming it. That's a breakdown in, producer consumer and that conversation. So having product managers who own that really goes a long way. So when I was running AI for the Department of Defense, this was a big transformation that we did where, again, people were hoarding data because it was called an asset, as opposed to the value of the data being the number of customers who use it and get value out of it, right? So that transformation, I think, is really important. I don't think it's magical. I think you need data product managers. And it's also those data product managers who deal with what are the regulations and the rules behind each of the data sets. So from an AI perspective, a data set might have to have certain kind of labels. It might have to be organized in a certain way. if you're going to be using it to make certain kinds of predictions, or if you're going to be using it in a large language model, it can't contain certain kinds of information. Now, some of that is going to come externally. It's going to be GDPR or the California privacy rules, or HIPAA rules, but some of it's going to be internal. Like, we have made a commitment to our customers that we won't share the following kinds of data. That was parts of the terms of service. So that product manager has to own that responsibility as well. So I think it's extremely important to think about data internally as a product and owners of that product, because that's where a lot of these solutions are going to lie.
It's fascinating, Craig. It's fascinating that you said that, right? Because at BombBomb, we're video, and we're talking about the use of AI in video, right? Potentially, and the blurred potential gray lines that can be crossed when you think about using somebody's data, altering somebody, like their image, right? Their image or their likeness, right? I think it's so fascinating that you said that, because it's an internal conversation that we're having right now. We want to be human, and we want to humanize things, but then also leveraging AI, right, and things like that to be more productive and to get better results. So it's a fascinating the way that you say that, right, around, because we are really kind of in this, I don't want to say it's a conundrum, but it's a really interesting conversation, right, around.
You're kind of a pendulum, I assume, going back and forth between corporate value and customer protection or customer value, and those often aren't the same, right? They're often against each other.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
So, one of the other advantages, I'm going to be saying this a lot, I guess, but one of the other advantages of the data product manager is they can also be the ombudsman for the customer, and they can actually come to that table and go, look, Matt, I know you want to increase revenue. That's your job. Shareholder value dictates that you increase revenue. But if we do it this way, it has this negative customer effect. If we do it this way, it has a positive customer effect. And having that voice, I think, is really important.
That's great.
Yeah, definitely want to get, and I appreciate both of your thoughts on that. Definitely want to get at the idea of dealing with the potential sprawl of data across organizations. I mean, Greg, you were talking about how somebody like just kind of like squirreling it up in their respective places. Like, how do you really address further address that, and also like getting through the potential layers of there's particular for example, Matt might have something very laser focused like he wants to get at, but it is under several tertiary layers of data or even security, what have you. How do you get at how do you find that meeting place to kind of allow the operational side to get to where they need to be in terms of like the data that they're trying to find.
I can jump in.
I would just say from a revenue standpoint, is data sprawl real? Absolutely, right? Absolutely. I mean, I think it's especially when you're dealing with disparate systems, right? And the connectivity between them all. And I think really like what we find is really understanding everybody's got to be on the same page, right? So for example, if marketing defines an SQL as this, do I define an SQL as that? Right? Does product define an SQL as that? This could be junk, this could be great, and this could be a VIP customer. But if we're all on the same page, right, we're going to be in a bad place. I'll give you an example. We our billing system connected to our CRM. Our CRM was showing a close date, right, in 1 month, but our billing system was something completely different. That fundamentally changes the insights, right? Because you think, well, one number is higher, and then we start playing whack-a-mole and saying, well, wait a minute, why is this going down, right? So getting in that rhythm and that connectivity and that clarity right across the organization, paramount, right? I mean, absolutely paramount.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say that as you need a bunch of binary relationships, right? So again, if you have these owners of the data, then instead of thinking about it as a singular, unified, magical solution that you can buy, which is just not feasible, you find the 10% of the data that's going to bring 50% of your value, and you tackle that first. And that 10% is going to be, this pair of people having this conversation and this pair of people having this conversation. And that's the way it's going to get started, right? It's going to get started by the folks who own the down and dirty data actually having the conversation about what date should it have been? Why did we miss that date? And going forward, what's our interface to make sure that doesn't happen again? I don't think it works if you think about that in a large uniform way. I think that's just a recipe for disaster. I mean, we've seen those kinds of big projects fail all the time. I think you can get to that later, but you sort of got to start with these binaries. The one other thing I would say is no new bad. Like the first thing I would start says, okay, we're done with, we were a startup. That's great. We had to go fast. Going forward, the CDO says this is the way data is handled, and we do no new bad. I think that's extremely important. And I know I work for a backup company, but I work for a backup company because of this. I'm not saying this because I work for a backup company. If you back up well and your backup system is centralized and searchable, backup is really a digital twin of your organization, right? Because backup isn't just 10 years ago, it's also 15 minutes ago. And so, whenever the last backup for that data was. So if you have a good search layer on top of that backup data, you can find massive amounts of value. But even if it's not on top of backup, you really need a good data discovery layer. I think new modern AI and new modern companies, like we have a relationship with Glean. I think new companies like that are being able to bring search tools to bear on this really hard problem of finding data.
How much heavy lifting and headaches come into play with trying to, let's say there's a lot of data the organization has, but it's dated. It might be very dated in terms of format, like how it's collected, and trying to then modernize it and get at it. On the technical side, what is needed to kind of really make that work, and then Matt, from the operational side, what if you're like, but we need it now.
I'm fascinated to hear this answer because I've gone through multiple data migration projects for a multi-billion-dollar deal versus a startup. So I can't wait to hear this, Craig. Talk to me about it.
I'm just going to repeat. I don't think there's a magic solution. I don't think there's you bring in the one consultant and they change it all. You find the chunks of data that are most important for your company. You find out who the customers of that data are, and you transform it in a way that makes it the most effective. But you dedicate the resources to treat. So let's say I have a collection of data, and that data has 7 major customers. Well, I could do 7 different versions of that data, but that just proliferates noise, right? Or I can have a leader who owns that data, who coordinates with those 7 customers and says to them, look, this is what the structure is going to be. Does that work for you? We'll help you transform your tool. This is what the structure is going to be. Number 2, does that work for you? And then they own that, and then they finally dictate that that's that structure. Very much in a PM way, though, a product manager way, where you're taking into account all of the needs of the customers. It's going to be that kind of bottom up that I think is the only real solution. And I don't think it's a solution. It's the only real solution to that immediate problem. And then when you get a new app with new data, you're going to have that problem again. So my answer is get used to having a lot of data PMs, because I think that's the solution in the long run. Matt, I'm sorry. I don't think I didn't have a magical answer for you.
No, it's
back up.
So I'm curious on that, Craig. I'd love to know, right? So, if we think about, I was a part of an acquisition where we merged a bunch of companies together, right? And we had 5 disparate CRMs, 5 disparate ways of thinking. We had different nomenclature around what a conversion was and what churn was, right?
Yeah.
And having all of these different personalities and egos and everybody in one room trying to understand and where to put things and how to put things, right? It's fascinating how you say bottoms up, because we bottoms up. I agree, right? Everybody has to have their stake, but I also really agree with what you said earlier around ultimately somebody's got to make the call, right? Somebody's got to make the call on this is where it's going to go. This is where it's going to be. So I'm fascinated.
So maybe I mean mid-level up, because I think the person that makes that call shouldn't be the chief data officer. It should be the owner of the data. So that's what I meant, sort of, maybe not the data engineers or the app that's generating it, but whoever owns that collection gets to be the leader of that data.
Yeah, and it's challenging though, right? We came together, and you have multiple revenue leaders fighting over what's right and what the process is. How fast do we go, right? It's an interesting one, right? And then we have, what's right, what's wrong. And the other thing is, what do we want to pull over? What is important, to your point, right? Like,
and some of it's trash. Let's get over thinking all of it's important. Some of it was valuable to you before you got acquired, but it's just not valuable to the new larger company, and it gets to get chunked out. And you need someone who's given the authority to make those kind of calls.
And it's a great point, Craig. And it's interesting when, let's call it fresh eyes meet old eyes, right? New ways of thinking meets old ways of thinking. This is important, and I want to bring over an account plan, and somebody's saying, why? What are we actually going to do with that? This customer's been with us for 100 years. Is it really relevant, right? Like, it's somebody's got to make the call, right? And
or let's be honest, in a merger or in an acquisition, some of the products that the original company loved might be going away, right?
Exactly.
And,
that's exactly
and it takes
right.
leadership. It takes leadership to make that call, right? I guess the short answer, Matt, is that's why you get paid what you get paid.
Not enough for that project, I'll tell you that.
Well, you'll get an IPO, me great.
Let's talk a bit more about who needs to make that call and the owners of the data. What happens if the owner of the data they might have personal real directives to say, hey, this is how this is going to be handled. This is the way it needs to be handled, and your operational request is being denied because you're asking for something that I just can't or should not have been ground into me to say that I can't do this because of maybe it's security or the external policy. How do you come to some kind of common ground? Who you talk about, like somebody needs to make the call. Well, who should make the call, or how do you kind of have a hot cocoa summit or beer summit to try and find a way to maintain those directives that the data owner has and the operational needs that might be immediate to move forward?
Yeah. So we have a data and AI council that consists of the CISO, the CDO, the chief AI officer, and very importantly, compliance and legal, right? That's extremely important for data. And we're just launching this now, but a big part of the goal is to be able to help answer those questions quickly. What does an escalation route look like? I mean, and I'm perfectly okay if the CEO has to make the call, right? That's because there might be times when that's the case, but I think you need a clear escalation route. It can't have it be the case that there's that battle in the board in the conference room, Matt. Like, if it's got to be fast, you can have that great conversation, but if it's fast in emergency mode, someone's going to make that call. But someone has to think through it now. Like, what are the kinds of trade-offs we're going to have between customers and privacy? What are the kinds of demands? Like, let's be clear, we have this legal demand. We're really safe here. We're borderline safe here. Where are we comfortable drawing that line? I think those things have to be thought through ahead of time.
I agree. I'll come at it from a slightly different angle, which is, me being a revenue guy, I want everything now, right? I want everything now, instant, and I want it in the right spot. I think, so for your example earlier, there has to be moments, right? Look, me and my head of products go.
There will be those moments, right? You expect those.
We go at it all the time, right? Well, it's resources, right? Well, I'm gonna have to take my engineering. I'm gonna go do this. I'm gonna have to do this. I'm gonna do this. It's gonna sacrifice a product roadmap, right? So, you have to have really good reasons why. As simple as that sounds, right? We have to my example earlier, if we're a SaaS product and an indicator of churn is the last time they logged in, the head of product might not understand that, right? So we've got to socialize that and say, hey, we've done the research, right? And we know that if they don't log in within 3 days, that's a problem. So your product and the way we're building our product is awesome, but it's not great if somebody's not going to use it and adopt it, right? So now they're on my side. Okay, great. I'm going to go put this on because I know as I build a great product, they're going to use it. And I've got the right insights and the right team, right? And the right actions, going back to what we said earlier, right? To actually, get adoption, activation, things like that.
Yeah, I think you just got to practice.
Practice.
I think Jean-Pierre, I think you just have to practice. I think you have to. That's why we love this council, and we're going to expand, making sure that it's not just the C-suite that's in that room, right? It's got to be the folks in the room who are going to be getting their hands dirty, and they have to practice having these kinds of conversations, right? You get to be a leader because you had enough of these conversations where you can quickly, sift through some stuff and make a decision. That sort of capability, that sort of capability is the word I want, has to be built into the organization via practice. So you're going to be making these decisions as head-butting battles forever. That's not going away.
It's a great call to Craig around approach, right? Like, look, sales, it's always the squeaky wheel, right? Especially when you're going to engineering and you're building a product. What was the last thing that I heard that a big customer churned? What's the most important thing? Is it the most important thing? Right. So then we go run over to engineering and saying, you got to go do this without actually thinking through. Does this holistically make sense to go build this or do this? Right. So, it's approach as well. Right.
And I do think you need leadership buy-in. So I'm going to tell this great story about when I was at LinkedIn and Jeff Weiner was the CEO, a man I unbelievably respect. There was a Friday metrics meeting. So when you hear metrics, you should hear data, right? Because data is driving those metrics. And then there's agreement over what churn means. And then there's agreement about how you're calculating all of these things. And there was this Friday metrics meeting, and Jeff would dive 5 or 6 layers deep. And if there was a change in your metric, it was the owner of that metric's job to come and brief Jeff. It wasn't his boss's boss's boss, the one who owned that metric. Why did it go down? Are you okay in fixing it? Was it just a bug in the system, or was it actually real? And that got the entire leadership of the organization in this single line about, this is how we think about it. This is how we be data driven. That sort of top down encouragement, I was gonna say pressure, but sort of top down encouragement, I think is really valuable.
All right, got a 2-part question to kind of close us out. Kind of a bit of an elevator pitch from each of you. Matt, what would you want to say and get it clear to folks who are on the tech side, the IT side, that element, to make it clear, like, this is what you need or looking for to help make data actionable and real for what you want to do. And Craig, on your side, what do you want to kind of get across to folks more on the operational side of, this is what is necessary. This is what is crucial. It must be part of the technology backbone to make sure that the data is handled in the ways that it needs to be.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, right, and Craig will say this, like, data is not useful at all whatsoever unless it drives insights and decisions and actions, right? I mean, that's it, right? But in order to know and to do that, you have to understand the customer. You have to understand the behaviors. You have to understand. So I think really understanding at a really microscopic layer, right? What does my customer want? What does value actually mean? When is value not being delivered? Because if you know that at the end, then you can go back, right?
100%.
And back into the data and say, if that's value, how do I get the right data to go make actions to go deliver that value, right? So I think that's the biggest thing, right? Is data is great and it's awesome, but if you just say, give me more data, but you don't know, it's about driving action, right? You don't know where to go with it, right? It's just going to be a mess, as Craig will tell you, right?
Yeah, I'm just going to echo that. It's, if you've got to start with the customer. In this case, I mean even the internal users of the data and the value that's going to bring them, and then you work backwards from that. You have to you sort of work backwards. That finds you the signal and the noise. All of those bits are mostly noise, and you've got to figure out where that signal is, and that's working backward from the customer value that can produce. I completely agree with Matt, and I think, and then on top of that, the modern tools, we're almost there. Like, I really feel like we're just on the cusp, but the modern tools allow for a kind of search we never searched for before, right? Like structured data search, great. We've had that forever, right? Like SQL for at least all my career. But being able to search over in robust ways, unstructured data, that's becoming a game changer and is going to be so more. But it could also create a lot more noise. So you need that trace backwards and that owner who gets to make the decision.
My brain just went 1,000,000 miles an hour, and Craig, I'm going to come to you after this concludes, because I got so many questions about that. Because you're right? It's a different world. You got to lead into it. It's not the same playbook.
Well, and we at Cohesity are happy to help you figure that out. Throwing in a plug.
That was the pitch. that was
always
the
be
pitch.
closing.
Always be closing.
Great. Well, I'm glad you both got something from this conversation. Matt, Craig, thank you so much for coming together and breaking bread together on this episode.
You guys.
It was fun. Thank you, guys.
You can find the DOS Won't Hunt podcast on Podbean, Spotify, and other popular podcast platforms.